All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the second Indian Energy Minerals Forum. I'm Michelle Littlefield, Program Coordinator with the USDA Consensus Program. And just a little bit about our program, formerly named Building Consensus on Carbon Capture, Utilization, and Storage, or CCUS, and Clean Coal Technologies, Consensus for short, is a cooperative agreement with the Department of Energy, Fossil Energy. The program educates the public, policymakers, industry, and stakeholders on CCUS and clean coal technologies by hosting webinars, along with a series of monthly educational briefings, conference workshops, technical reports, and we release monthly news clips of CCUS and clean coal related updates. If you would like to join our mailing list, if you have not done so already, feel free to send an email to the address at the bottom of the screen, and we will add you as a subscriber. So welcome to the second Indian Energy and Minerals Forum with our friends at Sagebrush Hill Group, LLC. And with that, I would like to introduce their president, Mr. Derek Watchman.
Thank you, Michelle, and yate everybody out there. As Michelle said, I am Derek Watchman, and I am a member of the Navajo Nation. And clan-wise, it's Iskini and Shlin, Tohana Bashashin, Kutnazani Desha Chayaro, Tabashanella, and I'm originally from a little town called Navajo, New Mexico. That's where I was raised, and right in the middle of the Navajo Nation. And so, but it's my honor today, along with Steve Gray, and I don't see him on here right now, but Sagebrush Hill Group, my company, along with Steve Gray, we were asked to support the Department of Energy and their fossil energy program, as well as the United States Energy Association, to try to look at and try to, come to some, some terms, if you will, with tribal energy development. And so I know everybody on this call here, we've all been in the business for many, many years, trying to spark and improve our energy economies, and many of our reservations, are prime and have access to natural resources, including oil, gas, and coal. And a lot of the tribes are moving in the direction of renewable energy. But through our work with the Department of Energy, we were asked to reach out and touch base with Indian country. And so this is our webinar number 2. And so we have an esteemed panel that everyone will see here, and I'll introduce them shortly. But the goal of these webinars, and you can tell by the agenda, is how do we get practical as possible. And so, in many cases, and I'm obviously guilty of this as well, is we start talking about our qualifications, and we try to market ourselves, and we try to get into infomercials, and which is good. But at the end of the day, we believe, through the Department of Energy and USDA, and of course Sagebrush Hill Group LLC, how do we unpeel the onion, if you will, so that we can really look at some of the major challenges, hurdles, as well as opportunities to move tribal energy development. And so that's the big purpose for these webinars. So I want to obviously pay special thanks to Steve Winberg, who's the Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Energy over fossil fuels and fossil energy. We thank him, of course, Lou Hartman and others, and of course we thank the United States Energy Association for their help. And so I'm not sure if Steve Gray, are you on the line? He may not be. And so so today, if you look at the agenda, we did ask Steve Winberg to join us, but he is unfortunately detained, and so he is unable to give some hello and introduction remarks from the U.S. Department of Energy. And so, but I guess on behalf of DOE, we thank everybody for joining us. And so, in terms of some housekeeping rules, let's see if we can keep our microphones muted so that we can hear clearly. If you have any questions, we do have a chat bar. If we have time, we will answer questions. And so the agenda today is primarily, we're going to hear from Mike Leddick with the Key Bank, who will talk about energy financing. Next, we'll have Mark Cruz and Johanna Blackhair from the Bureau of Indian Affairs talking about tribal energy resource agreements. And then we'll move on to Roger Frawa, who is president of his company, CODA, and he'll talk about tribal energy, tribal perspectives. And then we'll end with some comments and some insights from our chairman, Mark Fox, who is the chairman of the Mandan Hidatsu Arikara Nation, and he'll talk to us about, tribal participation in energy. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. And Mike and I go way back, in our banking days. Mike is with Key Bank, and at that time I was with Chase Bank. And so Mike has been with Key Bank for many, many years, and he's the national executive for the Key Bank's Native American Financial Services Group. And so Mike, welcome. And I'd like to turn the time over to you to talk about tribal energy financing and the way what we call it here is a candid discussion. And so the floor is yours, Mike, and welcome, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely, Derek and Steve, once he joins, thank you for the forum, Mr. Chairman. Good seeing you again. It's kind of an interesting discussion that access to capital is always something that is sometimes more of an aspiration than a reality. That it certainly applies to Indian country in a variety of different ways, energy notwithstanding. The issues associated with the access to capital are significantly challenged based on the education of the individuals that have the capital and being able to provide it to sovereigns and understanding that the risk associated with it is sometimes less than what it is in the commercial sector at large. The stability that Indian nations have is sometimes underappreciated by those folks, especially if the financial institution does not have experience in developing relationships with Indian country. Over time, if those financial institutions take the time to invest in the understanding of the stability of Indian country, they will find that that segment of the market, whether it's providing capital to the governments, the business enterprises, unlocking the natural resources and developing energy, for whatever reasons, you'll find that it is one of the most stable and safest places to develop financial partnerships. That being said, the reality of access to capital, especially as it relates to energy, and especially as it relates to energy in Indian country. I want to take a couple of the components of that energy sector that Derek initially described, renewable energies, fossil fuel, and then the mineral side, but really focusing on oil and gas and the renewable energy space and what the financial community sees as the requirement to provide capital. So with that, maybe we can flip to the next page and give you an opportunity to see what, one more, please. What we're seeing in the energy markets discussion, and this is really focused on oil and gas. And here's a backdrop into speed bumps that are looked at by financial institutions that are looking to provide capital for oil and gas businesses, whether it's commercial or in the Native American space. What you see here is a summary year by year from 2015 through 2020 year to date of the bankruptcies in the oil and gas business. So clearly, extremely commodity sensitive, highly capital intensive, and depending on where the prices were, that really drove the access to capital. And with the benefit of hindsight, the risks associated with it were not really evaluated. If they were, you wouldn't see 173.4 billion in charge-offs over the course of 5.5 years. So that's the roll up of where the experience has been in the energy sector. And I can tell you that financial providers that had a big stake in some of those would not have made enough return on the investment that they had to recover their portion of $173 billion worth of losses. So what does that do? It creates a tighter underwriting environment. Access to capital in any country has been difficult to begin with, but if you're looking at going to the bank market, which is the cheapest source of capital, and wanting to develop capital so that you can continue to monetize these assets, here's what you're looking at. At the top, asset coverage, right around 2 times. So basically, you want to be able to loan 50% loan to value of the valuation on the bank terms of what that oil and gas asset is worth. So they basically take the oil and gas price and establish some sort of a discount to that to value that asset. And that valuation of that asset then turns into a 2-to-1 coverage. So as an example, if oil and gas is, call it $40 a barrel, there would be a discount applied to that, could be 10 to 20%. So you'd be looking at on a 20% factor, you're looking at $32 oil. $32 oil would be the basis under which that asset is valued, and they'd loan $17 against that. That's what that translation of the 2-to-1 coverage means. And that's on producing assets. And there was a time where non-producing, proven non-producing reserves had a value in terms of being able to access capital. That is no longer the case in terms of today's environment. Obviously, things are going to change, but the tight capital access for oil and gas has simply gotten tighter. And that's really an important point, because proven undeveloped resources do have value today. They have not been discounted significantly in terms of being an asset that can be leveraged in order to secure capital. Leverage is another big issue, and it's basically a multiple of EBITDA. And it wasn't uncommon to see oil and gas producers leveraging up to about 6 times. In today's environment, kind of given the uncertainty and the volatility of the commodity, 3 and 3.5 times funded debt to EBITDA may get you to turn some heads. You might be able to get some folks interested in the bank market, but expect some covenants that would say, we want you to take this business over a course of time and leverage under 2 times. We'll start you off at a 3 times covenant, and then begin to lower that. And that's done through reductions of the covenant that coincide with the revenue generating activities. It's really, really tight. In pricing, so you add kind of another hurdle to the access to capital. You're in today's environment, in the oil and gas space, 300 to 400 basis points over LIBOR, with a LIBOR floor of 1. So LIBOR floor of 1, 400 basis points over that. Your coupon to get access to capital at a 50% of value of that reserve is 5%. And then in addition to that, in order to help mitigate potential impacts of the commodity risk, the bank market in general is looking at a 50% hedge on a rolling 24 months, basically developing some certainty into what 50% of that production will have in terms of a return. And obviously, hedging has its pluses in terms of acting like an insurance policy, but then there's upside that's lost if you're locking yourself in on prices. And then there are restrictions on what distributions can look like from the business. And they're typically 2.5 times, once you're under 2.5 times funded debt to EBITDA, those restrictions begin to allow distributions, and they're really funded only from free cash flow. So it's not, if you've got an access to availability on your credit facility and you want to leverage the asset, it really is, if you want to make distributions, it's got to be demonstrated from free cash flow. Again, probably one of the most unfriendly markets today in the oil and gas sector if you're looking for bank-based financing, which theoretically is the cheapest source of capital. And then you add on lender-friendly provisions. So the constraints around access to capital will include the provisions of not hoarding the capital and ensuring that there's a deposit account agreements, and you expect some waterfall and deposit account control agreements that flow into those agreements. And then the other component, to ensure there's some financial capacity and stability in the business, you get a credit facility, let's say it's $100 million, and you meet all of the criteria in terms of advance rates, et cetera. One of the conditions that a bank or a bank group would look at in order to deploy capital into oil and gas would be that they want to make sure that you're not using all of that capacity initially for existing operations, and would like to be somewhere in the 50% funded of the commitments that are out there, so that there's a 50% cushion of capital availability for kind of the support of the business, and typically for growth of the revenue streams. And it was one of the objectives that I wanted to get to, was to answer the question that Derek originally posed to me. There's a lot of infomercial. There's a lot of capacity building. There's a lot of communication around, yes, we have an appetite, and that can come from any financial institution. But once you get into the negotiations, expect something similar to this. Capital access in today's environment in oil and gas is extremely tight. It's not non-existent, but it's not very user-friendly either. So with that backdrop in the oil and gas sector, I'd like to evolve to renewable energies and what we're seeing in the marketplace there, and what an individual can expect. Slightly better environment, but typical themes relative to restrictions, typical themes relative to conditions precedent before really getting into negotiations on what capital access can look like. And so let's take a look at that in the renewable energy space. And it's typically in the renewables, the most common are obviously wind and solar. And there are some projects where hydroelectricity falls into that particular space. But these are the very common themes. It's a purchase power agreement. So in the event that there's an energy project that is started or yet to be developed, the expectation for accessing bank-based capital for renewable energy is you got to have a purchase power agreement in place. Somebody has to have been committed to buy that energy, and it has to be typically a rated utility. So it can't be, a rural utility that doesn't have a rating. You're probably not going to turn the heads of energy providers to help you monetize your renewable energy project. It's a rated utility. What the market has seen is that there are corporates that are interested in accessing direct energy sources, and they are also entering into the marketplace. So rated utilities has also made room for rated companies. So you've got Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, Facebook, Walmart. Organizations like that are looking at developing energy resources, and doing them directly, and kind of managing their own access to that energy, and developing a relationship that's not through a utility, and they're part of a broader base of clients. And then there's the interconnection agreement, and it has to document that the power generated has an outlet. So you got a PPA. You've also have to ensure that you put together the transmission of where it's generated to the end user, and those interconnection agreements are all identified, and they're developed, and they're tight. And then obviously going through the contract and the permitting processes, stuff like the turbine panel supply and major agreements, going through all of the required permits, state, local, and tribal government conditions that are all met, and ensuring that there are the considerations that are provided for environmental and wildlife issues are all in place, and getting obviously the construction contracts, engineering procurement, known as the EPC agreements, and the balance of plant, the BOP and transmission substation contracts. So as you can see, there are a number of critical steps that are involved in having transmission and from a power generation to the end user, everything that happens in between has to be developed and typed. And then there's a financial model that the financial institutions will look at based on what it takes to generate the power, what you have in the PPA in terms of its cost, and then developing an analysis on all the costs covered, what kind of cushion is there between the costs and the price that's being paid by the purchaser, and ensuring that there's a sensitivity analysis that provides some sort of cushion in the event that there are any unforeseen problems. And in this instance, I think this is probably one of the most positive components of financing energy projects, whether again commercial or tribal. And here's where I think tribes really have an untapped or underrepresented market, and that's in the renewable energy space. Equity contributions 10 to 15%. So you can get 90% financing with all of these other conditions in place. It really is a rather simple financial analysis that's being put together on these renewable energy projects. I can generate power for X. I've got all of the interconnections put into place, and I sell it for Y. X and Y has a positive delta to it in terms of free cash flow, and there's a financial model that makes sense. And there's a lot of demand for renewable energy in the marketplace in general, and certainly financial capacity is better, at least in today's environment, for renewable energies projects than unfortunately today in the fossil fuel industry. So with that, maybe I can stop and see if there are any questions that arise from this, or if not, then we turn it back over to you, Derek.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that. And it looks like it's a double-edged sword when it comes to access to capital in any country. But I think what I'm hearing from you is that I know that a lot of tribes are delving into the renewable energy side, and so it looks like it's a little bit easier prospect for that side. But we still have in this country tribes with a lot of capacity when it comes to fossil fuels, and so there is possibilities. And so good presentation, and thank you for that. And so we will accept questions through the chat, and maybe we'll get to that at the end. So by the interest of time, we will keep moving forward. And so I next want to move to our Tribal Energy Resource Agreements discussion. Mark Cruz, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Economic Development, and of course Joanna Blackhair, who is the Deputy Bureau Director for Trust Services. They're going to speak to us about the Tribal Energy Resource Agreements. And Mike, you mentioned that earlier. One of the components that's needed is all the permits. And so I haven't been tracking too much the Tribal Energy Resource Agreements, but I know that Mark and I have talked on a few occasions about speaking to this and trying to understand how it works and its relevancy. So without further ado, I want to thank Mark and Joanna for joining us. And so I'll turn it over to you, Mark, to tell us about the TERA and the ins and outs of that. So thank you, Mark, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Derek, for that kind introduction. I'm Mark Cruz. I serve as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs here at the U.S. Department of Interior in Washington, D.C. Today, I'm joined by our Bureau of Indian Affairs Deputy Director, Joanna Blackhair. She oversees the Office of Trust Services for the BIA. It's no secret that our administration has a profound commitment towards energy development, and that includes Indian country. The department has worked hard to work with tribal governments to ensure that they are getting the responsiveness from the department and the BIA to produce energy of all forms, whether it's oil and gas, topic of conversation here today, wind, renewables, what have you. We've been working hard to improve the responsiveness from Washington, D.C. all the way down to the agency level, and working hard to clear backlogs in our APDs, as well as rights of way and other land use issues. We also are working hard to improve the environmental reviews and expedite those processes that make more sense for tribes and take into account their thoughts, views, and perspectives on the development of their lands. One very new, well, not quite new, but newer issue as of late is what we call our tribal energy resource agreements. And so the Assistant Secretary has put the responsibility of the TERAs on the BIA Office of Trust Services. And so today we will go through a little bit about what a TERA is, what it's not, some of the process that we've developed this year, and then John will be available for questions and some of the more intricate components to what is involved with the TERA approval. Before moving on to the presentation, I do want to kind of illuminate for the attendees how Indian Affairs looks at energy. We kind of have a holistic approach to it. I oversee the Office of Indian Energy and Economic Development. Within that office, we have our division of DEMD, Energy and Minerals Development. And many of you may be familiar with that office because the very limited discretionary grants that Indian Affairs possesses usually come out of that shop. And out of that shop, our staff based out of Lakewood, Colorado, do a very good job of working alongside tribes with their proposals and doing different analyses associated with any potential energy development on tribal lands. And so that is bifurcated from the BIA, which John oversees, who do the more legal side and permitting side of that production, just so there's no conflict between the two entities. And so with that, we'll move forward on the slide. Michelle, I don't know if you're doing that. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Thank you. So what is a TERA? So a TERA is a Tribal Energy Resource Agreement. This was enacted by Congress, and it was actually an update to a prior iteration of TERA. And the attorneys who do a lot of the work for all of us found a number of technical deficiencies in the prior iteration of TERAs. And so Congress went ahead and updated that statute to make it more workable for the Department and Indian Affairs and for Indian tribes. These are agreements between the tribes and us at Department of Interior. From the tribal perspective, once a TERA is approved, the tribe may enter into energy-related leases, business agreements, and rights of way on tribal lands without the Secretary's review and approval of each individual lease, business agreement, or rights of way. So another step towards our vision of creating greater tribal autonomy, self-determination, and self-governance. We profoundly believe that TERAs promote tribal oversight and management of energy resource development on tribal lands, and they provide another avenue under which tribes may develop their mineral resources. And it supports our national energy policy in increasing the utilization of domestic energy resources. Next. For presentation purposes, these are the citations for the different statutes that I'm referring to, and Jonna will refer to intermittently through this presentation. And next slide. And this is where I'll turn it over to Jonna to describe what the application process and timeline look like from the tribal perspective, as well as the application process and the required content of a TERA application. Jonna? Hey, Jonna, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, juggling between these buttons here. Okay, sorry about that. So after taking a deep dive into what the TERA application process is, the tribe will provide the application to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And as we go through the slides, you'll see where the link is or the email address is. And we've so far had the opportunity to meet with one tribe in a pre-consultation process. And the pre-consultation was just a in-depth review of what the TERA is and what we can do to provide energy-related activities in a streamlined manner, and working with the tribe to identify what it is that they were wanting to incorporate into their application. So if you take a look at this timeline, the total timeline to approve a TERA is 270 days. And then in an initial review of another application for a TITO, it didn't take that long. So we've really expedited our processing time and our coordination by utilizing the Indian Energy Service Center to track and monitor the activities associated with the application process. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This slide represents the contractable federal functions. If you can see all of these items here, we are prepared to work through the various types of contractable federal functions and then the inherent federal functions. In that pre-consultation process, that's where we'll have the in-depth discussion with the tribe and their interests as they apply. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Here's the required content in the application. And here's the address. The format in the PDF will be the TERA, will go to tera@bia.gov with all of your supporting documentation. So go ahead and go to the next slide. An application must contain all of the following. So you can go ahead and read that. And I know Michelle and Derek will provide this presentation to you all so you can go back to it and as you start putting together your checklists on what is contractable and what you are interested in applying for. The energy-related activities include examples such as pre-leasing functions for leasing, communitization agreements, unit agreements for approval, right-of-way, and the 638 contractable items from the Bureau of Land Management and those items. Approval of the application for permit to drill, that's the APD, and royalty compliance. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Here's the information, what must be described within the application and what the tribe is interested in undertaking in those business agreements and what could be approved under TERA. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, here are the authorities. It was first passed in 2005 with the Energy Act. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Here's some limitations that we've identified. After approval of a TERA, the department must provide the tribe with all of this information. Access to the status and support of the services, that's also coordinated under the Indian Energy Service Office. Assistance to ensure third-party violations or breaches of these terms and agreements within the business lease. That's all coordinated and conducted in that first contact with the tribe in that pre-consultation process. So we'll understand jointly what can and cannot be done with within these authorities. Okay, go to the next slide. Mark, go ahead and talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
okay. Thank you, Jonna. And just, I know for the participants, the TERAs are quite dense and they are new. And I will say that we have not approved a TERA application yet, although John and her team are currently in the pre-application phase with a few tribes. But we are very cognizant of the in-depth and the details that are needed in order to submit a successful application, and something we look forward to continuing to work through and having conversations with tribes so that we can improve this system. But just understand that I know it looks dense and complicated, and it is, and we are fully aware of that and look forward to getting our first one done and taking lessons learned from that. Also authorized at the end of 2018 was the TETO. So we have TERAs and TETOs, more acronyms to throw around. And what TETO represents is the Tribal Energy Development Organization. This would be any enterprise, partnership, consortium, corporation, or other type of business organization that is engaged in the development of energy resources and is wholly owned by a tribe, and any organization of two or more entities, at least one of which is a tribe, that has the written consent of the government bodies of all tribes participating in the organization to apply for a grant, loan, or other assistance under 25 USC 3502, or to enter into a lease or business agreement with or acquire a right-of-way from a tribe. So it either needs to be wholly owned by a tribe, or you need to have all of the tribal entities if it's going to be multiple parties involved in the TETO. Next slide. Again, for the attorneys on the line, here are the citations for legal authority. Again, this presentation will be made available to all of you, so you can refer back to it. So I hope you're not scribbling feverishly. And then next slide. And here I'll turn it over to Jonna to describe, once again, the process for a TETO and the required content for the TETO application.
Just to go back to a little bit about what a TETO is and what a tribe could discuss in any opportunities with a TETO is one of the questions I was asked in one of the pre-consultation was, can a TETO enter into joint venture agreements and serve as a grantee? In coordination with our legal counsel and our solicitor, Steve Simpson, the response was yes, a TETO can enter into a joint venture agreement and serve as a grantee as stated in 25 CFR section 224.30. It includes any organization or two more entities that at least one is the majority interest owner of the tribe that has written consent to govern all bodies of all tribes participating in that organization. And they can apply for a grant, a loan, or assistance under 25 USC section 3502 and enter into a lease or a business agreement. So, there's some options there under a TETO that would help expedite these business transactions. And as what this slide depicts is what we would do in coordination with the tribe and within the department to approve those TETO applications. Again, the tribe must be the entity that is responsible to providing all of the documentation to apply for a TETO. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So the process for submitting a TETO, again, the tribe must submit the application to the Department of Interior and contain all the regulatory requirements according to those authorities listed. The department has 90 days to review and approve the application and an additional 10 days to issue the certification. So we carried this out in coordination and partnership with the tribe applying either for the TERA or the TITO. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, I mentioned that the majority interest would be owned and controlled by the tribe and the tribal land in which it is being developed. So there's the information there for you to provide the supporting documentation to TERA@bia.gov. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Upon receiving the certification of the TITO, may enter into a lease, a business agreement, or a right-of-way with the tribes without the secretarial approval, as long as the scope of the lease and the business agreement does not exceed that of the TERA as established in Section 224.85. So another way to expedite and streamline the processes for tribes to enter into these agreements. It's beneficial, and so we want to make sure that we've covered all the bases in support of the rights of way. I know that's a big issue out there, the business agreements and the terms of the lease. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Here's the Indian Energy Service Center's information. The Indian Energy Service Center is a multi-agency collaboration between BIA, BLM, Honor, and OST. Our mission is to expedite the oil and gas activities and standardized processes in this engagement within our federal partners. We've also have federal partnerships with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, EPA, and Army Corps of Engineers. So they're also engaged in processing any activities that are coordinated with our federal partners at the local offices as well as through central office. Currently, our acting director is Carla Clark, and she's been engaged at the local offices to support Indian energy development, conventional and renewable. We found that efficiencies are gained by applying the streamlined improvements and offered recent development activities and training. Virtual training, standard operating procedures have been enhanced to support business processes and activities, assuring that tribes are engaged in developing and providing the mechanisms for revenues. So Carla Clark and Albert Bond are the contact. Again, here's the link to BIA.gov, Indian Energy Service Center, BIA.gov, and then TERA.bia.gov. For any of your applications, feel free to reach out to myself and Carla, and we can coordinate any of these pre-consultations, any of the technical support to your staff to identify, what it is you're interested in. One of the pre-consultations was, you don't have to go for everything all at once. If you're wanting to identify, maybe it's the right-of-way process that you want to take over. And then we would give you the right-of-way training, start building that capacity, and get you on the systems. With this environment of COVID, we've been able to coordinate a lot of our online working mechanisms to best suit transactions that are pending and getting them approved and working with our local offices. So tribal administrative support and technical capabilities and our review processes have gone on. So I just wanted to share that with you all so that we can hopefully get some tribes interested in started on this timeline that we talked about. So with that, I guess that's, next slide. That's the last slide. All right, I guess if you have any questions, we'll be open to answering some questions.
Well, let's give it a shot. Does anybody on our panel have any questions? We don't have the ability to take verbal questions from our audience, but real quickly, Mike or Chairman Fox, any questions?
We don't have any questions thus far.
Yeah,
Hey, maybe while people are thinking of questions, Derek, John, can you talk a little more about the inherent federal functions list that we published in February?
Yes, in support of the federal functions and identifying what is contractable, I guess you can go back to, I think it's let's see, what slide is that? The inherent federal functions was, I think, slide 6.
Jonah, which one were you talking about?
Keep going back. It's the potential scope of application. Yeah, right here.
Okay. So the secretary identified what was contractable for federal functions, and the Indian Energy Service Center has provided an opportunity to have an awarding official at the service center to coordinate these contractable federal functions with our federal partners, which is BLM and Honor. Section 202 is the royalty compliance part of the federal functions, and then BLM, their federal functions that could be contractable are the applications for permit to drill, the leasing inspection and enforcement and production oversight, and securing and enforcing bonds. So in an effort to support them while they stand up their Indian Self-Determination Office within BLM, we are coordinating that support through the Indian Energy Service Center. The inherent federal functions that are not contractable are the Archaeological Resources Protection Act and those permits associated, royalty collection and distribution, and then the issuance of royalty order in the notice of non-compliance. That still remains the functions of Honor. And we could share with you the secretarial order and the appendixes that was provided during the tribal consultations.
That would be great, Jonna. That way we have that available for the record. So thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, in the interest of this program, let's move on. So thank you, Mark and Jonna, for presenting this information. It's a lot to digest, but we'll get through it. And thank you for sharing contact information so that folks can get back to you with questions. And so I'm going to now move the agenda on to our next speaker, and Roger Frawa, who's the president of Kota Holdings, and he's going to talk to us about his perspective. He's been in the business for many, many years. I got to know him while he was at the Council of Indian Resource Tribes, and since then, Roger's been doing a lot of work, on the energy side for tribal concerns. And so, Roger, welcome and thank you for joining us. And so, the question to you, the topic is tribal energy developable or not. It's kind of a vague question, but I know that you have your slide here, so I will turn over to you for your comments and perspectives. So welcome, Roger, and thank you for joining us.
Well, Derek, thank you for the invitation, and to you and the rest of the hosts and the participants and the co-presenters, it really is an honor to be here. This is a very different format, I'm sure, for all of us that we're probably getting used to, and if not, we're going to get used to it in terms of the COVID impacts to our meetings and our convenings and whatnot. COVID has also had an effect, I know, on the tribal or Indian energy sector as well, both on the production and the consumption side. Before we get into that important question that you asked us to tackle, which is Indian energy developable or not, and I put in parentheses the or not and would like to get to that, but I think it's really instructive and important, Derek, to get to the history, because if we don't acknowledge and understand the history, then we're bound to repeat it. And I think when we start looking at the history of Indian energy, I think it's really instructive and important both, because I think we can just jump right in on financing or jump right in on policy points and make the assumption, because we all operate out of our own sense of reality, make the assumption that we are all on the same page and we all have a common understanding. And I think that was really apparent to me growing up, so to speak, at the feet of the tribal leaders of Peter MacDonald, Earl Oldperson, and their tutelage and wisdom, and really understood that when the Council of Energy Resource Tribes and the member tribes convened meetings, they once in a while talked about energy, but most oftentimes they talked about customs, traditions, history, and that was very instructive, I think, for the energy sector. And I think the or not, in parenthesis for my presentation and discussion, the or not happens more than often when people jump right in to the deal table. They jump right into the financing. They jump right into the policy discussions, and they jump right into the deal structuring without any acknowledgement of the history. And I think the history is so important, not just because from a native or a tribal perspective in our oral history that was handed down to us from time of emergence to where we are today, but I think inside of our DNA, as we approach the deal structuring table or the developable or not decision-making intersection, I think that we often wonder, why aren't we able to move forward? And we sit here and we watch government, we watch industry kind of go right by us in terms of the development. I think we have to acknowledge that tribes own 20% or so of America's fossil fuel or conventional fuel resources. And I know this is a fossil energy discussion. And we also have a unenumerated amount of renewable energy resources. So I think that when we start thinking about those vast resources that lie predominantly in the hands of the Inner Rocky Mountain West tribes on the fossil fuel side and the rest of Indian country on the renewable side, we wonder, why aren't those resources being developed? And why aren't they being developed for one of the fastest growing sectors of the U.S. populace, which is the American Indian? We're growing at a rate of about 4% per year. So when we start thinking about 4%, that's not a very large number by anybody's standard, but we're our tribal populations every 18 to 20 years. And when you think about that kind of very vast development, I don't need to tell the Honorable Chairman Mark Fox or anybody or any other tribal leader that kind of development of our tribal membership really does constitute a lot in terms of how are we going to feed these people, how are we going to house these people, educate these people, that are coming into our tribal membership in our tribal roles. And energy is a big part of that community and economic development. So I think when we start thinking about the history, I think we would be very remiss if we didn't go back to our own origin stories, and we talk about the colonization of America. The British Crown dealt with the tribes as sovereign through treaties. And then when the independence happened, when the U.S. placed American Indian Affairs in central government through the War Department, sometimes they treated us as sovereigns, but other times they treated us as people to make war with. So they established, the U.S. established federal jurisdiction over Indian country. And that has a whole lot to do, that federal jurisdiction, with Indian country and Indian energy as we understand it to today. So the U.S. promised to protect Indian country from settler encroachment. You look at the Northwest Ordinance, another piece of one of the most important pieces of legislation in the Confederation Congress when the westward expansion. And that set precedent for public domain lands and tried to aim at positive relations with tribes. Then you go to the 1790s, the Trade and Intercourse Act, no sale of Indian lands without U.S. authorization, and U.S. managed trade with tribes on their land. Well, that has a whole lot to do with the basis of how we're structured to today. Then you go to 1824 and the formation of the BIA and treaties and schools and boarding schools and trade and correspondence, and then the Supreme Court decisions from the mid 1800s looked at Monroe and Adams giving us setting up reservations and giving us space and time to adjust, and then the Marshall Trilogy that looks at tribes as domestic dependents. That has a whole lot of impact on the way that tribes in Indian energy is regulated and produced today, and with the U.S. as our guardian. You look at the Cherokee versus Georgia case, and how the court ruled in favor of the Cherokee and gave the tribes first glance at maybe sovereignty in the U.S. Supreme Court. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, at the beginning of removing us from our lands and the westward expansion. And we went from, millions of acres, 138 million acres to 48 million acres during those time frames. So there's a whole body of history, I think, that is really important and instructive, because if we don't acknowledge that body of history and the importance that it plays in the regulations and the policies, the deal structuring, and the ability for tribes, government, and industry to work collectively and together on the developable or not question, I think that history really does play a whole lot of impact into that. So I wanted to not give a history lesson, but I wanted to go over that because if you look at the slide, and you can have the conventional resources, coal, oil, natural gas, nuclear energy with uranium, the renewables with hydro, biomass, solar, wind, all that kind of resource on the left side of your screen, where Indian country owns any vast resources, both renewable and non-renewable both. Well, we know that industry is the world's largest industry, and there's no, it's the biggest lobbying group in the United States. There's no bigger lobbying industry than the energy sector. There's no bigger economic sector than the energy sector. And we have such a big part to play in that with our vast resources. And we know that the way that industry works is you develop those resources, you export, dig those resources, you drill for those resources, those get put into pipelines or transmission lines into generation, transmission, and into distribution, and ultimately into the customer base, whether those customers are American homes in cities and in suburbs, commercial, government, and industrial resources. And I think that there's probably nobody better to talk about the impacts of the industrial age than Chairman Mark Fox and the development of the hydro dams just off of his current reservation and on his ancestral lands, and how that kind of development and what Indian country has contributed to this great nation and our American development throughout history because of a lot of our natural resources. You fast forward all that to the Council of Energy Resource Tribes back in 1975. They had a good run up until about 2007, whereas about 27 energy producing tribes came together and convened policy discussions and changed the federal Indian relationship. They changed the way that business was done on Indian lands because they had industry and tribes and government all in the same room at the same time. And I think that made, back in those days, I think that made that development or developable or not. I think during those times, I think developable was much easier and more fluid because there was an aggregation of tribes. There was a sharing and a learning between and amongst those tribes. And I think that, you look at what's happening today and the volatility of the marketplace, where we've seen oil go from $135 a barrel down to $27 a barrel, and how that has impacted Indian country and some of our economy. So we know that there's an oversupply of oil and natural gas. Russia and United Arab Emirates is at price wars and affecting the global price structure. We know that COVID has had an impact greatly on the energy sector because of the consumption. The consumption is down, people aren't going out, and manufacturing is down. So I think we take that 3-point hit on the energy sector of oversupply. We've got a lot more supply than we have demand. We're not able to convert that into marketable or transportable, especially in natural gas, quite yet. And then the price wars, and then COVID, all of a sudden it makes for a really challenging economy. So you think about the tribes like the Hopi tribe with Craig Andrews and others working very hard, looking to explore all kinds of resources, and maybe looking at helium and things like that. Southern Ute Indian tribe, I think one of the most prolific energy tribes and companies in the country. Bruce Valdez has left the growth fund and now is sitting on the tribal council and helping to steer from where he's at. Mike Davis at Blackhawk Energy at Hickoria, David Williams at 3 Affiliated. And you look at what's happening at the Osage Nation and in Oklahoma, where all of a sudden through the Supreme Court case, maybe there's some new opportunities in Oklahoma for Indian energy, which we hadn't seen prior to that Supreme Court decision, and being able to look at it through a different set of eyes. When you start thinking about Oklahoma, some of the richest people on the planet, he's a great guy, and DiCaprio and Scorsese are making movies about the genesis of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Well, that had a whole lot to do with Indian energy. That movie that'll be coming out here probably in the next 24 months with marquee names like Scorsese and DiCaprio, writing the script of how Osages were murdered for access to the oil and gas resources. So again, when you start thinking about what that history means and how instructive it is for us as Native American and tribal leaders who are all born exactly the same, knowing nothing, we all had to learn, through that history. So when you're sitting there and you're asking ourselves the question, developable or not, think back about that history and how instructive that history is to the deal makers at the table. So we can jump in and start talking about policy and finance, but if we don't talk about the human element, about what makes that deal and how the people are approaching that deal and what remembrances they have coming to that deal table, I think it is very instructive. So not to belabor that point of history, because I really think it's important, but to move on, what's happening today, self-determination with a keen eye on internal capacity building. I think that if we can start spending the kind of time, energy, and money focused in on helping to raise the entire fleet between tribes, government, and industry, and start with that historical context, I think would be very important. I think it's important for Kinder Morgan and those kinds of companies. I think it's important for any energy producing company wanting to do business on Indian land, so that they have a better sense for who they're dealing with or negotiating with. And I think that looking at that as an opportunity to help grow a new generation of tribal youth, because I think that that's our most valuable resource. While I'm very proud of our renewable and our fossil fuel resources, and again, 20% of fossil fuel resources is not a very small number. It's worth billions and billions of dollars. But more important than our coal, oil, or natural gas is our tribal youth. Our youth is a renewable resource, and I think that we can start focusing in on the youth and developing really good capacity building. San Juan College has a degree program that is worth your while and worth your look. Colorado School of Mines should have more Native Americans involved in their programs and a heavy recruitment process because of that 20% of mining activity, mining resources. I think that they are doing good, but could be doing a whole lot better by recruiting more Native American students on those programs. And for us tribes, I think, looking at building partnerships and alliances, aggregating ourselves, and forming the kind of intertribal organizations that got us to where we are right now. I know that with the influx of Indian gaming, we've become very competitive amongst each other. But I think on Indian energy, we have too much to lose and too much to gain by not convening ourselves again and forming some kind of a multi-tribal program and initiative, because I think that's where we started really affecting the federal Indian energy policy. So I think building capacity at the leadership, community, and the staff level, access to capital, as Mr. Ledick was so eloquently talking about, and continue to live our own reality. When we think about Chairman Fox and the tough decision making that he has to do, by balancing economic development, cultural preservation, and environmental protection all at one time. I'm not suggesting that CEOs or mayors or senators or congressional people don't have that same dilemma, but I promise you they don't have the same dilemma in the way that Chairman Fox and other tribal leaders of the 570 federally recognized American Indian tribes, because Chairman Fox's people are counting on him to protect their cultural preservation and environmental protection and economic development, and do it with fossil fuels. Try sitting in that seat, and it's not a very comfortable place. So I think that removing policy barriers on our terms, removing triple taxation, because Indian energy could be the cheapest and most available energy, but because of triple taxation, because of state, federal, and tribal tax, there is no other energy that is taxed in that same way. And I think that changed, and you could unlock some of the vast resources that we have in Indian country. And I think that giving us the time to develop the resources according to our timelines and our cultural values, our social value, our values, I think that's what's going to make sense. To the extent that there's conventional fuel resources in the ground, that just means they're still going to be there in the ground. And I think as we keep depleting more resources elsewhere outside of Indian country, I think that those resources will be saved for the future generations of more sophisticated youth that we can start building coming behind us. So I think that in closing, I would offer that us as Native American tribal leaders, as professionals, Derek, Mr. Ledick, and others, that we just maintain to be the perseverance, the tenacity to be whom the Creator intended us to be, and working that and our commitment in aggregation in support of each other. So, Derek, I'll stand for any comments or questions that anybody has on that subject.
Thank you, Roger. Very thorough and provocative comments that you made, so I certainly appreciate it. We'll save our questions for the end here. I know that we're running out of time, but I want to now move on to Chairman Mark Fox of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikla Nation. And welcome, Chairman Fox. We appreciate you joining us, and hopefully we saved the best for last. And so I think Roger basically provided a good segue to you. And I know that you've been a staunch supporter of trying to address dual taxation. Roger said triple taxation. So that's a new one for me, but I understand what he's saying. So, but for you, Chairman Fox, thank you for joining us. And so the question in your perspective is, what does energy mean to the tribes, and what does energy mean to you? And so the floor is yours, and we look forward to your comments. So thank you, Chairman Fox. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Maz. Good. I appreciate that. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Derek, are we okay?
Yes.
Okay. Appreciate that, and you're saving the best last. I think sometimes what I'm tending to find is they always put me towards the end so they can say, well, we're all out of time, and cut me off. But I hope we got some time, some points out there. But but to hear all due respect, and you know, Indian country is if anything that this pandemic and COVID has taught us is try to figure out how to deal with the white man's technology, and that's for darn sure. And so, and it doesn't always go as best as we want it to. We're learning that, and it's not ours. We're simply paying for that service. And sometimes I feel like a Hollywood movie I saw where the aliens take over the world. We're the humans trying to subversively get messages out there, and they're interrupting our signal, and sometimes we're cutting out and things. But you know, I want to wish everybody well. This is you know, hard times, and not always in a good way. The pandemic, what is done to the world, done to Indian country, United States, etc., is you know, beyond measure. None of us had experienced this before. And I sure hope that our children and grandchildren don't. Although when they do, and if when they do, we'll be better prepared, at least in Indian country. And that's kind of my hope. But my prayers and blessings to each and every one of you, Derek, and also you know. Let's see, Michelle. Sorry, excuse me, Michelle. But Michelle, thank you for your hosting and setting this up, making it work. And I just want to visit real quick on the previous presenters. Did an awesome job. Good job, Mike, on the key banking opportunities for lending. You know, nothing happens. Snowball Dodgers. That's the way it works. And oftentimes we have a lot of resources, a lot of great ideas, but we can't make that connection. And more often than not, it's usually fiscal in nature that prevent us from being able to capitalize these ventures and move them forward. So it's really key that Indian country continue to focus on how to capitalize energy development or any development in general. As far as the department's presentations by Jana and Mark, thank you very much. Very important concept. I will say from our perspective on TERA, we have not yet, we've explored it a year or two ago. I think about 2 years ago, we were assistant secretary and others, and we did our best to try to how to make it work for us. But right now, we don't feel that in its current version, there's enough latitude, enough clear-cut advantages for us to move forward in that process. And so, and even though we remain greatly interested, so I hope in the near future, the possibilities of TERA, you can see not a lot of tribes participate, and there's a reason for that. So we need to correct some things, and if we do that, I think we'll go a long ways. And then, of course, Roger, thank you for your comments. Right on point on many of those. Spoke very well on some issues I may not have to touch on now, but I missed the old days of CERT. I remember them and participated in them in the early years, and my first years on council in the 90s. I wish we had another CERT organization, or at least somebody to fill those shoes, a new organization that would do the same thing, because we desperately need an energy resource group that is tribal, that can help advocate at a high level. We're spread out too much, and yet we have a lot to do. So I thank you for your update and your information, though, and appreciate it very much. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is, of course, introduce myself. I am Chairman Fox, Mark Fox. It is my honor and privilege to represent our MHA Nation. And, you know, I thank this opportunity to be able to present. You know, we have a lot to visit on. So much going on right now with the COVID and what have you, but we're trying to keep our head above water, so to speak, here. And we need to continue to do that each and every reservation and Indian country. So that being said, one real stark important point, when we talk about energy development, the most important point that I can share, I think, is to understand the lay of the land. More than 30% of the established and proven non-renewable energy resources in this country, in the United States of America, are country on trust land. And that's a really substantial number. And the point being is, what can or what have we done with it? And you know, to date, you know, you see what we're doing up here. We were at pre-COVID, we were at over 300,000 barrels per day. We're now getting back up there in about 240,000 barrels per day, but we're far from where we were at. But nevertheless, we are doing everything we can to continue to enhance our energy development through production. But at the same time, that 30% in Indian country is a remarkable thing, but it's also something that has created a lot of issues, because from financing to rules and regulations, there's multiple layers of regulations that hog tie us oftentimes when we want to develop, albeit they have great purposes. At the same time, it makes it really difficult to do that. And, we're no exception to that. We're no exception to that. Here in North Dakota, we started about 12 years ago our energy development plan and program, and we were forced into a dual taxation first and foremost. You hear me whenever I speak. Derek or others have heard me speak. One of the biggest impediments to economic development, whether energy or anything else, is this looming monster called dual taxation. And basically, dual taxation, as we all know, is simply where the state government comes in, or counties, or any external government comes in and says, we have a right to tax here, and before any development can occur, you have to have either an agreement with us or accept the fact that our tax is going to supersede your own. And that dual taxation, where you have both trying to implement their taxes, is oftentimes enough to drive away investors, drive away developers and producers, and anything else. So at some point in time, energy or otherwise, United States government, if it really truly wants development in Indian country, is going to have to deal with this issue. You're going to have to eradicate the dual taxation problem, created by, a famous case, Cotton Petroleum. And we need to get that done. Yeah, our example here in the United States, in North Dakota and at Fort Berthold here, we're forced into agreement. Basically, it said, the oil producers wouldn't come in. So from 2008 to present day, the state of North Dakota has taken in through tax agreements, original and modified and amended, have taken over $2 billion worth of revenue, taxation revenue, that coming from primarily wells that exist, production wells that exist on trust lands within our boundaries, and $2 billion plus that the state has taken. And then when we turn around and we say, look, you need to put some of that back, it's usually, well, you have your share, we have our share, and they don't put it back. Yet we're supposed to be citizens of the state. We're supposed to be, government to government relationship. We have no representation in Congress without the state. We're really having a heck of a time here. But when you have $2 billion that's taken away, but not put in back in the form of incentives, in form of infrastructure and things of that nature, it makes it very, very difficult. And so we've been dealing with that. What happened when energy came in at Fort Berthold? The biggest problem that we've got is nobody came in prior to the boom taking off in 2008, 12 years ago. Nobody should have, the United States government, knowing full well that it was moving on to trust land, should have came in and said, look, here's our problem. We're going to come in, we're going to allow industry to come in and have access to your lands. A study should have been done. Millions of dollars should have been put ready to say, well, if that comes onto that reservation, when it comes on, then what are we going to do to help this tribe and the local governments contend with all the huge number of issues that they're going to have to deal with? And they never did do that. So it was learned the quick and hard way, and it just was thrust upon us. And so our tribal government was really in it, and nobody really prepared for it. The federal government wasn't prepared. The state, for the most part, wasn't really prepared, not at that level. And of course, the tribe wasn't ready for it. And the only entities that was really ready for what they wanted to do was the oil industry. And then it came in fast and hard. And so, from high traffic fatalities, tearing up our roads, we've got environmental impacts, you got spills that are occurring, pollution to our air, all these number of issues that were out there. that really made it difficult for us to participate, albeit, the revenues were there. We had to argue with that. That tax agreement we had to revise. It took us a number of attempts, 2013, and then just last year, 2019, we were able to get back an agreement that we both could sign and end a long time dispute over the sharing of those taxes, which put a little bit more of that revenue into the tribe's hands to be able to build this infrastructure, to be able to deal with these problems. So my message to everybody out there, if you are either in the beginning stages or you're about to develop your resources, you need to come out, see our lands, see other lands, talk to our people, talk to others who are versed, because it isn't all royalties and revenue out here. There are so many issues that if you can nip them at the bud in the beginning, you can really go a long ways into properly enhancing and developing your energy resources. If anything, I want that message to be understood today, that that's what we're really working hard and trying to do. And so, I know we don't have that much time, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly talk about, what are our goals here in our energy development. Now, I hear a lot of talk, and in particular, the last one from Roger, that's what we're all talking about. Derek, I know you spent your lifetime working on this, is economic development. And because, we're all aware that Indian reservations had our economies taken away or destroyed. They created federal dependency and made us depend on federal government while they took our resources. And so what we have remaining, we've never had real opportunities to develop, not with the full support that the federal government should do. So, but we can't do that unless we do a number of things. We can't change the social welfare situation unless you start doing some things for yourself. And albeit we might have more resources currently than maybe a fellow tribe has, and we're trying to do that, but there are some basic things that need to be done. In order to reduce federal dependency and to be more self-reliant, you got to start doing things like growing your own food, right? You need to have agricultural development. You need to have water development infrastructure, very critical, very important to tribes. Water plays a role in energy development and economic development in many different ways, and you need to make sure that's there. We need to start developing and exporting goods. We need to understand that it is one thing to be self-reliant and self-consumed, but you're never going to change your economy if you're just simply self-consuming. You need to export goods. If you want to change your economy, you sell something outward, external dollars come in and they circulate. That's how you change the economy. You need to have an established tax base. Evil word, that tax, TAX, tax. A lot of people don't like it. But the reality is that's our governments are funded. And especially when you have a number of entities who have gotten into the habit of coming on Indian lands and developing economically and then walking away without paying a dime of tax to tribes. That's got to stop. And we've got to use that generated revenue to build infrastructure like roads, infrastructure for bridges, infrastructure for all these different things that we have to play, housing, all these things that economically you will have to contend with as your economy begins to develop, and you have to do that. But one of the biggest ones is everybody should be in a mode of trying to figure out, how do we generate our own power? How do we generate our own electricity? How do we generate these things? And so that we're not relying on outside systems to provide that for us again. And so these are some huge significant steps that we have to take. Here at MHA Nation, we've done that. We're doing our own upstream, midstream, and downstream. Instead of just sitting back and saying, well, we'll take some royalties and a little bit of tax, our tribal nation is of what we call a sovereignty model. And this sovereignty model basically says, we're not going back and just taxes and revenue, royalties, we're going to get involved with that development itself, upstream, midstream, downstream. And so that the revenue grow exponentially for our tribe and our membership. And that's what we're trying to work towards in all that. So we get involved with our energy development, but also we do spin-offs, a greenhouse project that's coming, capturing that flare gas that you see the pictures all over the place. So much gas in our air, impacting our environment. Nobody's getting paid when it's burned into the air. And so we're trying to capture that for things like growing agriculture, greenhouses, things of that nature. And then we put $100 million in a rural water system as well, as I mentioned earlier. So through all this, everybody that's online here and our guest presenters and Derek, I really appreciate this time and opportunity. So for us, in a nutshell, energy development, our trust resources, we're not big oil. We kind of got caught up with this pandemic and with this CARES Act and no inclusion and stimulus. We've been left out in the cold. We already lost 3 times or 4 times more than the has given us. And so what is that teaching us? It's teaching us something here. As hard as things are, Indian country needs to wake up and say, look, when the next time a pandemic comes in, the next time some crisis occurs in the world or the United States, and there will be these things that are going to occur, make no doubt in your mind. We need to learn our hard lessons today. How do we prepare for when the poop hits the fan? Guess who's going to be the first ones they're going to have? They're going to turn their backs on, and it's going to be Indian country. I don't mean this disrespectfully. It's just what is occurring. So the only way we can do that is to diminish federal dependency and start figuring out ways that when these things occur, or even before that, how we can generate our economy and make things work. And so that's been my goal. That's my message. Derek, you hear it all the time. Lessen federal dependency. To depend on the federal government for 90 or 100% of everything you do is going to keep you impoverished for the rest of your days and your tribal nations for hundreds or thousands of years to come. We don't want that to be that way. We've got to make deliberate choices to diminish that and to move forward. Because at the end of the day, there's 2 things I want to just close with is that, if the standard of living, we have a very valuable resource in oil and gas. If the standard of living of our membership doesn't increase in general, then we're making a huge mistake. We're almost better off leaving it in the ground. We don't want to have that same old song of energy came in, oil came in, developed, took the resources, made a lot of money, left, and then the reservation be worse than it was before they came in. And these are some of the things, and I wanted to share that. And then finally, this dependency, again, back to that, is that we all need to understand that there's no way in hell, excuse my language, but there's no way in hell that I see the federal government ever coming in, and I'm a United States Marine and honorably served, that are ever going to come in like they would a foreign country in which we engage in war on our bomb and do all kinds of things. There's no way that the United States government is going to come in and say, look, we really need to change Indian country. Let's put a $50 billion, $100 billion budget together to go in and actually incorporate and cause this economic change. There's no way that's going to happen. It's a mentality. We have to change how we think. We have to accept the fact that that's not going to occur and then start moving and start doing some things. I thank you for sharing with me. I'm happy to ask any questions you might have, but that's what we're doing here. Albeit, it's not easy. It's challenging and difficult internally, externally, and everything else. We're moving in that direction the best we can, and we're hoping to take advantage of this limited resource and put our eggs in other baskets economically, and so that we'll be exporting and be a significant contributor to the economy of the United States like everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Fox. Very inspiring. And I appreciate all your remarks, especially the sovereignty model. And so very, very good words. And so thank you. We're gonna move on to Steve Gray, and I'll leave it up to him if he wants to ask questions. But Steve Gray and I are the ones that are putting on this project in conjunction with his partner Energy and USDA. And so Steve is out of Farmington, New Mexico, and he's the chairman of the Four Corners Economic Development Corporation. So I'll turn it over to Steve for wrap this whole webinar up. But thank you everybody for all your time. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. Boy, all of the talks today were very inspirational. That is exactly what we wanted. That is exactly what we want to hear. Because, you know, the whole discussion that we're talking about with the Department of Energy is energy, and what does that encompass? So I want to just start by saying thank you to the Department of Energy for them continuing to support us to reach out to Indian lands and to communicate with Indian lands and gather information. That is very, very important. And USEA, as their contractor who's been working with us to also help us on that, we're really thankful on that. And I want to start by saying, you know, we have to ask ourselves what's next. I mean, it's great that we're all listening and giving input on this big issue surrounding energy. But now we got to ask ourselves, what's next? What do we do? What are those things that we've got to do? Here in the Four Corners region, as Derek mentioned, as the chairman of the Four Corners Economic Development Group, we are constantly asking that question. And we have to do that if you're going to impact economic development. And that's really our goal. How do we make an impact onto economic development? So one of the things that we want to do is continue this dialogue. We've spread it across the whole country. And so one of the things that we're looking at now is looking at more at regions. In various regions, you know, those issues are a little different in every region of the country. So Indian country falls in those regions. So that's one of the things that we want to do is look at it. We want to have a much broader look at this issue as well. Right now, people say, well, I just do fossil, or well, I just do renewables. But when you start to look at energy as a whole, you know, it encompasses everything of both of those. And so we need your input. And we've scheduled these speakers because not only of their expertise, but also their view of what they see in their areas. And there's a lot more people out there that have these kind of viewpoints. And so that's what we need to gather. So I want to, want you to think about that and provide Derek and I the input, your input back of what do you think now we should move to on that next level. We do have the Department of Energy's ear, and that's very important. You know, they've listened. They want to see what can we do, but we've got to be the one to shape that plan. We've got to shape that strategy and say, this is what is needed. So I want everybody that's listening, everyone that spoke, to really start to think about that, because this is not going to go away. We realize with the virus and the pandemic that it slowed a lot of things down. But now, as things start to come out of that, there's opportunity. We need to capture those opportunities. We need to not be at the back and saying, what if? We need to be in the front and say, here's our thoughts, here's our ideas, here's where we need your support. Because at the end of the day, we're going to get out there and we're going to make it happen. So I just want to conclude by saying thank you, everyone, for joining us, for being part of this event, because it's really important, and we want to continue to work and talk with each and every one of you. Thank you on behalf of Derek and I.
Thank you, Steve. This will conclude our webinar, and so we will send out a survey and ask for questions, and if our panelists don't mind, we'll share the information with them. We also are going to share the PowerPoint presentations, and it'll be at the USEA website. And so like Steve said, he and I are very supportive and appreciative of Department of Energy's efforts through their fossil energy group. And so they obviously understand and really want to reach out. And so this is going to require everybody's attention and time and thoughtfulness. And so, Steve, thank you for your conclusion. And so I will end it there, but I want to say again, thank you for joining us. Mike, Roger, and Mark, and Jonna, and Chairman Fox. We really appreciate it. And if you don't mind, Chairman Fox, I'd like to give you a call after this because I have a dual tax question that I know that you have a lot of insight on it. So I will follow up with you on that. I'm helping the TTAC committee. And so with that, I know that we're past an hour and a half, and I know people's time. I'm sure everyone's had to drop off and jump onto another webinar because that's kind of the process that we're working in right now. But with that, I want to say thank you, and thank you, Michelle, for being our host and kindly working all the slides. And so with that, I want to say a hat to everybody, our panelists, and to our participants. And so we'll call this a very excellent webinar, good information. And until next time, we will keep this project going. So thank you, everybody, and so long. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.